So thanks again, everyone, for joining us today. Let's start up. We're going to do some introductions to start by introducing members of the BrightBuilt team that are with us here today. And then I will hand it over to Chris Jones, who's with us from Revision Energy, and give him a chance to introduce himself as well. And then he will take it away for the presentation itself. So I'll just real quickly introduce myself. I'm Carlin Meyer, Director, Project Manager, and Architectural Designer with BrightBuilt Home. Been with BrightBuilt for 7 years since we launched, and plan to be around for a good while longer. I'll hand it over to Jay next, because he's next to me on the bar here.
Hi guys, I'm Jay Sandifer. I handle sales here at BrightBuilt. I'm likely the first person that you'll talk to here before you get to work with the real talent. Thanks for being here.
I'll jump in next. Yeah, thanks. Hi, I'm Jessica Benner. I've been working with BrightBuilt Home for just over 5 years now as a project coordinator, architectural designer, and marketing director. I'm excited that you're all here. Thanks. Audrey?
Thanks, Jess. Hi, I'm Audrey Rolio. I joined BrightBuilt just over 2 years ago. I am also a project manager. We do design and coordination, and I also do energy modeling for the whole company. Thanks.
Hi, my name's Lauren. I'm the newest addition to the BrightBuilt team. I'm coming up on a little over a month here, and I'm so thrilled to be working with such a team of rock stars, and I am an architectural designer.
Right. Yes, good afternoon, everyone. Chris Jones is my name. I'm with Revision. I've been with Revision Energy since 2017. Clean energy consultant is the handle. I get to work with both homeowners and business owners alike to determine what options they might pursue in order to complete the renewable energy transition. And it's a lot of fun. Every now and again, I get to take part in these sorts of outreach opportunities, educational opportunities, which is also generally a lot of fun as well. So good to be with you this afternoon.
Okay, great. Thanks, everyone. Again, if you have any questions throughout the presentation, please feel free to put those in the Q&A box in the Zoom function. And immediately following Chris's presentation, Jessica and I will be coordinating some questions that were taken from the original RSVP form that you filled out to sign up for this webinar. And then after that session, we will dive into some of those Q&As that come in through the Q&A box during the presentation itself. So I'll hand it over to Chris to take it away.
Okay, splendid. I will share my screen if I could just get a quick confirmation that you guys see page uno.
Yep.
Got a thumbs up? Okay, great. Here we go. So yeah, good to be, once again, really great to be with you guys this afternoon. My name's Chris. I've been with Revision for some time. I'm actually in our showroom, as it happens, here in South Portland. We do, in fact, have a skeleton crew still here. And, I feel pretty fortunate that I'm still able to get into the office and work as needed because, as we all know, working from home presents a unique set of challenges. So yeah, here I am at the Revision Energy headquarters, if you like, in South Portland. I'll talk a little bit about what we're doing, our mission, if you will, and then talk more about certainly, solar and, just the idea of a net zero home, a high performance home, such as the ones that BrightBuilt offers, and certainly, discuss how that fits into the broader renewable energy transition. And yeah, thank you to the BrightBuilt gang. Really glad to be able to have this opportunity to join in today. So Revision, our mission is to lead our community in solving the environmental problems caused by fossil fuels while alleviating economic and social injustice. Certainly in New England, we have at this point branches in New Hampshire, Maine, and Massachusetts. So that is our goal. We want to lead the charge, the renewable energy transition charge here in New England. And in 2017, we converted to employee ownership, and that's something we're very proud of. You know, it sort of helps to distinguish us from, you know, just your general contractor. Each and every one of us is an employee owner, and I do believe that that helps to set us apart. You know, helps to instill the fact that we really do care about what we're doing. Each and every person who touches a project is very, very committed to the success of that project. We're a B corporation as well. That's a designation that not an awful lot of people know about, but essentially that's a third-party designation that we pursue every year, and it allows us to say that, you know, we're not just, you know, profit-driven. We're a company that's committed to, you know, social engagement, community engagement, environmental stewardship, all these sorts of things. And, you know, it's something we're very proud of as well, our B Corp status. I would encourage you, if you have a chance, to look into other B Corps out there. It definitely is it makes you feel good to know you're doing business with a business that sort of sets the bar a little higher for themselves. Anyway, that's enough about Revision Energy. You'll have my email address at the end, and I can certainly tell you more if you'd like. Let's talk a little bit about, you know, why solar, why renewable energy in general. I mean, a lot of this will be stuff that everybody's familiar with, but I'll sort of skim the top real quick, if I may. You know, global greenhouse gas emissions, the vast majority of that caused by energy usage. Vast majority of that is stuff that we can control, each of us individually. As we see on this table here on the right, this pie chart, electricity and heat and transportation accounting for a large portion of the greenhouse gas emissions. Those are things that we can all control to a certain extent in our own lives. United States, of course, is the biggest contributor. That's not good. It's good to know that, of course, you know, that as of late, we're committed to, as a country, you know, changing. It's good to know that we're back in the Paris Climate Accords, for instance. In any case, a way to reverse that trend, three ways, really, the most powerful ways to reverse those trends: improvements in energy efficiency, electricity decarbonization, and fuel switching. Again, these are all things that each of us can do to a certain extent within our own lives. Now, let's dial that down a little bit further to homes, right? We're all homeowners here, or at least, you know, we all have that goal someday. And, you know, maybe this is something you could pursue to really, you know, pursue, you know, your own personal renewable energy transition, or, you know, eliminating your carbon footprint, if you like. But is this, as quaint and idyllic as this looks, is this a practical solution for most of us? Well, probably not. So then let's talk instead about the notion of a solarized household, a net zero home perhaps. And it's a pretty simple concept, really. The idea being to electrify your home to as great an extent as possible. Now, if you're building a new home, a new high performance home, for example, obviously it's possible to completely electrify, whether that's, you know, electric heat, electric cooling, electric domestic hot water, so on and so forth. Maybe if you're already a homeowner and, you know, you're with an existing structure, you know, maybe not all of that is possible. But again, the idea here is to electrify the home as much as you can, and then provide as much of that electricity as you can yourself cleanly on site. And obviously there's, you know, tremendous economic and environmental benefits to that process. We'll talk more about what the net zero home looks like as we go on, but this is a graphic that Revision, we really like to try to get out there as much as we can. Again, this is something that's achievable for all of us, certainly. Let's talk about the specifics of solar, you know, how to plan for it, what some requirements might be. So the most important of these is a southerly orientation. Now, true south in New England is actually equal to 195 degrees magnetic on the compass. When planning for the siting of your building, therefore, you know, if you're within, you know, plus or minus 15 degrees of true south, you're going to be in a good position as far as the orientation of the building. That said, you know, even today, with panels that have become far more powerful than in years past, you're able to make up for perhaps a more easterly or a more westerly orientation. So that's not the be all end all, but if you are in a position today to be planning again for the siting of your building, as close to true south, again, within 10, 15 degrees east or west of true south is ideal. Now, mind you, a lot of the stuff we're talking about here, specific to how to plan for solar is you know, specific to Maine, specific to the Northern Hemisphere, for example. A good example of that is the roof pitch. Now, perhaps if you're closer to the equator, this might be a little bit different, but here in this location, you want to be somewhere between a 6-12 pitch, around 25 degrees, and then 12-12, 45 degrees, somewhere within that pitch range, if you like, is where you want to be for your roof. Neither too steep nor overly shallow. Somewhere in the middle is going to give you the best opportunity to collect irradiation all the year long. Obviously, more or less depending on the time of year. In the winter, of course, the sun's much lower in the horizon, so production will certainly dip for all of us this time of year, regardless. But again, if you are in the stage where you're planning for a new home, again, you want to be somewhere between 6-12 and 12-12 for the roof pitch. And the third factor you want to keep in mind is shade. Now, there's a calculation here that you might consider when trying to determine, do you have a good shade-free site? Alternatively, you could give someone from Revision Energy like myself a call, and we'll come over and not literally hop up on the roof, but we'll get up there and we'll take a shade reading to be sure. Having said all that, I think that this is one of those things that most folks have a pretty keen grasp on just intuitively. Most of us are able to tell a shady roof from non-shady roof without much education. But in any case, trees, other buildings, this can really impact the production of a solar system. So you want to certainly plan for, again, southerly orientation, sort of pitch, somewhere in the middle here, like so, and then a more or less shade-free roof. Those are the three factors you want to optimize as best you can when planning for a future solar project. Now, we're going to talk a little bit about the different types of on-site solar, and we're going to talk a little bit about Maine's net metering policy as well. And this ties into backup batteries as well. Sort of, a little bit of a deep dive here. Bear with me if you can. I'll also mention that there's off-site solar possibilities as well. For example, community solar farms, which is something Revision offers. That's a conversation for another time. But if you do think you'd like to learn more about community solar, which is basically off-site solar, meaning there's no panels on your roof, for example, take a look at our website or shoot me an email or something. In any case, the three types of on-site solar power: off-grid, which is you'll have solar panels, some kind of battery backup, and you're not tied to the utility in any way. But that's something that a lot of folks are interested in. A lot of folks are interested in at least learning more about. And to be candid with you, in general, that's maybe not the best bet. And it could be a little bit of a toss-up, if you're building a new home really out there in the woods, and the cost of having CMP bring power to that location is going to be prohibitive, like over 25 grand or something like that, then at that point you may consider an off-grid home. But to be very clear with you, because of our sort of seasonal variation in solar production here in Maine, throughout the winter, you're not going to be producing an awful lot of electricity. So therefore, you need to have a very, very robust and likely quite expensive battery bank of some kind, and coupling that with burning something for heat. You're going to have to burn something. So off-grid, a lot of folks sort of have that ideal in mind, but in practice, it doesn't always pan out. Now, something that might work a little bit better, believe it or not, is grid tied. Now, yes, this does still involve a relationship with CMP of some kind, and we all know how successful they've been of late doing their job. Sorry, I'm going down a bit of a rabbit hole there. In any case, grid-tied solar, nonetheless, is still a really good bet because it effectively allows you to treat the grid itself as a battery. You have solar panels on your roof, and you're interconnected with the utility, and this allows you to effectively send electricity to the grid when you don't need it. This is your surplus. Throughout the summertime, your solar system will produce surplus electricity all the time, basically just meaning that your home is consuming less than the panels are producing. All that surplus goes back to the grid, and CMP will start to build up for you within your account this bank of kilowatt hour credits. Those credits get applied to your bill at times of the year when your solar production is less, winter, nighttime, etc. So in that way, a grid-tied solar system is actually able to treat the grid as a sort of battery itself, which is very beneficial. And again, this is our net metering policy here in Maine. It's 1-to-1. Your solar power, this is important, your solar power does not lose its value when it goes to the grid. You get to take it back whenever you need it at full value for free. That's great. It's one of the things that makes solar so compelling in this state. Now, lastly, you might consider grid-tied solar with battery backup, which basically allows your solar system to not only remain on during a grid outage, but it allows your solar system to charge a battery, which itself can run certain loads in the home during a grid outage. So basically, you can have your solar power battery combo take the place of a generator. That's essentially the best of both worlds. You can be off grid, right, when you need to be, meaning that if the grid is down, you've got, you still got whatever the case may be, hot water, some heat, your fridge is still running, some lights and outlets, etc. Again, just sort of the best of both worlds. So again, off grid, sort of pie in the sky, grid tied, more practical for most of us. Certainly, 99% of the systems Revision installs are grid-tied systems. And again, to sort of be resilient with your solar in the face of a grid outage, you can consider battery backup. Those are the three types of on-site solar power. Thanks for bearing with me on that one. Again, we'll probably talk more about the net metering policy. That's crucial. Here we have an example of a BrightBuilt home with solar on it. Very cool. This building uses air source heat pumps for heating and cooling, and of course with an excellent building envelope. As you can see, they didn't even need to specifically use the entire roof space for solar, which is great. It's interesting to note that this space left over, might very well in the future be used for an additional 10 panels or so that the homeowners could charge an electric vehicle at home. Very cool. So this is sort of what we're going for here. Again, a home that produces all the energy it needs on site on the roof. Very exciting stuff. Again, possible for all of us at this point. I'm going to show you this. This is an example of the monitoring portal that basically comes along with a solar project with Revision. And this graphic here really does help to illustrate that net metering policy I was describing. So again, your solar system, it's Wi-Fi enabled. It's connected to the internet vis-a-vis the inverter. That's basically the only other major piece of equipment besides the panels themselves. This inverter, because it's Wi-Fi enabled, it can give us all this great information about, the carbon emissions that have been offset. That's very, very cool. But here we have, again, the production. So if we look, this red sort of baseline here, that accounts for the power that the building was using at night when there was no solar production. Now that sort of continues even once the solar kicks on right around 6 a.m. here. So at this point we see this huge production curve, and this blue accounts for what the home is using, right? So again, right along the bottom, either in red or blue, we have the power the home is using. All this green then is surplus. So again, those are all credits that are going to go back to CMP and be applied to your bill at other times. So again, this really gives you an idea as to how that net metering function makes solar in Maine so compelling on an annual basis. We don't need to worry about a monthly basis or daily. All we need to worry about is, will your roof produce the power on an annual basis that your home needs? In this case, again, you can see all that surplus sort of helping with that. I'm going to discuss, if you will, a sort of few specifics as to, the ins and outs of the investment, if you will. Most solar systems consist of between 20 and 25 panels. High performance homes certainly may need less than that. The building we just saw a few slides back, for example. Having said that, a larger home, even if it is very tight, the really efficient envelope, it's conceivable that in order to heat an awful lot of space, you may need a larger solar system to provide the electricity you need. So again, it'll vary by the size of the house, but a high performance home like a BrightBuilt home may certainly need a good deal less than the average 20 to 25 panels. The average system cost, again, between $20,000 and $25,000. that upfront cash expense will certainly have paid for itself in about 10 years. You may think about it a different way. You may think about financing your system instead. And if that's the case, you know, for example, right now, via our lending partners, you know, we've got about a whole slew of options available to you, at least as far as loan terms, 7, 10, 15, 20 years. Right now, the rates are as low as 1.99%. This effectively allows people to swap a CMP bill for an equivalent solar payment, you know, and in that way, you know, your month-to-month expenses really don't have to sort of change at all. You can be solarized, you know, and not really notice a difference as far as your monthly budget, if you will. So those are the sort of two ways to think about a purchase. Again, if you're going the cash route, think about a 10-year payback. If you're financing instead, you really want to think about just swapping your CMP bill for a solar payment. In Maine, leasing is not really an option, and that's basically because the state incentive is sort of non-existent. Again, we do have a very compelling net metering policy. Not every state has that, but there's no, you know, rebate for going solar here in Maine. So there's not so much of an incentive for contractors to go about a leasing option. So not something that's currently available in Maine. Right now, Uncle Sam will contribute substantially to your solar investment, 26% in fact, and that federal tax credit is in place until the end of 2023. So that makes the next 2 years critical time to consider solar if you're planning to do that. As I said, no state incentives here in Maine. We do have the very compelling net metering policy. As far as how much roof space you'd want to have available, again, we talked about what the specific, you know, requirements are. More or less south facing, you know, a roughly, you know, 35-degree pitch to the roof, hopefully shade free. You do want a good amount of space available, you know, about 35 by 12. I'll say this anecdotally, solar system economics tend to be the best when we can just build a nice big square. The more you sort of end up with smaller arrays or sort of patchwork stuff, you know, the more you tend to see the cost per watt creep up. So if you can manage a nice big square somewhere in the neighborhood of 35 by 12, you should be in good shape. Any kind of roof type is going to be perfectly fine for solar installation, with the one exception being like a slate roof. You don't see too many of those these days anyway. Standing seam metal, corrugated metal, asphalt shingle, whether it's architectural or 3-tap, these are all going to work just fine. I would certainly say that if you know, again, many of us are, based on the nature of this webinar today, considering a new building, but if you have an existing roof, you know, you do want to make sure that it has at least 10 years of life left to it prior to going solar. Otherwise, you could end up in a sticky situation. Right now, we see wattages ranging from 320 per panel to 400 watts per panel. There's also larger format panels, for example, 72 cell. Those are mostly reserved for ground mounts. And in general, a roof-mounted solar panel is going to be around 60 cells, again, somewhere between 320 and 400 watts. If we look at that panel on the right there, that's a very good example of what Revision is installing most of the time. Excellent warranty protection on solar equipment, around 25 years, and this is a maintenance-free system, which should certainly last, you know, 50 years, and ideally, it'll have paid for itself many times over by then. I'm going a little bit long here, so I'll try to speed things up. In conjunction with solar, again, we talked about the electrification of the home. One thing you might certainly consider is electric heat pumps for space heating and cooling. In this slide, you see the various Mitsubishi equipment that we offer. Over there on the left, that's a wall-mounted unit. That's by far the most common. It looks like beneath that is a series of Harry Potter books, if I'm not mistaken. That's neither here nor there. And then you've got a floor-mounted option on the bottom, a ceiling cassette above that. So different options for the indoor unit. And then on the right there, we see the outdoor condenser. Those are the two major pieces of equipment for a heat pump system. At this point, I'm sure most people are really quite familiar with heat pumps indeed. I'm sure you've seen them at your neighbors' homes, your friends' homes, etc. And again, sort of killing two birds with one stone. It's heating in the winter, cooling in the summer in one appliance. Exceptionally efficient equipment, and again, pairs very well with solar in that this is an electric appliance. You might also consider electric hot water. a heat pump water heater is the best option for that. In my opinion, this is something that absolutely every homeowner should own if they don't already. We saw on the previous slide, we saw again an outdoor condenser there on the right and the corresponding indoor unit. With a heat pump water heater, there's actually no outdoor equipment. That condenser sits right at the top of the very well insulated tank. And this is not only the most affordable way to get your domestic hot water year round, it also dehumidifies. So most of us might have this equipment in the basement, and in New England, dehumidification in the basement is generally a good thing to have. This investment will pay for itself exceptionally quickly. Both heat pumps for space heating and cooling, as well as heat pumps for hot water, currently have a great rebate through the state. So these are things that you definitely want to consider in order to pursue that, again, electrified home that solar offsets. We talked a little bit about battery backup. And again, this is basically a way to keep your home resilient when the grid goes down. Right now, Uncle Sam will help chip in for that project as well. 26% towards battery storage also. And there's a few different options available. Today, we tend to go with the Tesla Powerwall. Here we can see a familiar face standing beside his battery backup system. Again, 3 Tesla Powerwalls. This is outdoors. That wouldn't be possible here in Maine. Battery systems would have to go indoors in Maine. But in any case, each individual one has 13.5 kilowatt hours of usable storage. So basically, this is a way to make it so that your home becomes a sort of microgrid in the event of a grid outage, right? So your solar is producing power, which is charging up the battery, and that battery system, depending on its size, could be running either the whole house or perhaps a select series of critical loads, right? You know, well pump, maybe some fossil fuel, hot water, fridge, these sorts of things. So again, you can certainly consider this as a solution to take the place of a generator, right? To make your home be solar powered even during a grid outage vis-a-vis battery backup. Solar compares, or I should say solar with a battery compares very favorably to generators, at least as far as the sort of wheel around 5 kilowatt variety that you would plug in to an inlet on the exterior of your home, you know, as opposed to those where they might be, you know, certainly noisy, there's no automatic transfer, you know, you have to fuel them up, so on and so forth. The battery is just much more convenient. There's no refueling, there's no maintenance. It's much like solar, sort of what we consider to be a set it and forget it technology. And here in Maine, that battery will just sit at 100% capacity waiting for the grid outage. And, you know, in most cases, even without solar recharge, you're going to be able to, again, run critical loads in your home for multiple days, again, and that's without solar recharge. So it certainly compares very favorably to a battery. The last piece of the puzzle might be an EV charger. On the right, we have the Tesla EV charger for Tesla vehicles. On the left, that's a Clipper Creek charger, which basically is good for as a universal charger, if you will. And this is something that you might consider also. Again, somewhere in the neighborhood of 10 solar panels is going to net you on an annual basis about 3,500 kilowatt hours a year, which is about the number of kilowatt hours that the average American would need to drive 12,000 miles a year, which is the average amount that the average American drives per year. So again, 10 solar panels at your house, that means you could do all of your charging at home. And, you know, the idea of finding space for an additional 10 panels on the roof is certainly not, you know, unheard of. So again, you can truly pursue today the complete electrification of your home and your transportation and provide all the power that you need for that yourself cleanly up on the roof. Again, the idea being to electrify everything and provide that electricity cleanly with renewables, ideally solar, wind, so on and so forth. Now, there's a sort of broader picture to the renewable energy transition, sort of on a grid scale, right? So that doesn't just mean pursuing renewable sources. It also means making the infrastructure itself more sophisticated, more demand responsive. And of course, storage needs to be a part of that. The smart grid of the future has a lot of ins, a lot of outs, right? Different sources, whether hydro, solar, what have you. And then, you know, we also have, again, as I said, a more improved infrastructure. There needs to be demand responsiveness. You know, we'll talk a little bit more in a moment about some topical examples. And the idea of, this being not just grid scale, but also sort of at the smaller scale for, for homeowners, right? The idea of in the future, your car being bi-directional, meaning maybe that takes the place of a battery. Maybe your car battery keeps your home running in the event of a grid outage. Maybe the grid becomes so intelligent that it's able to sort of, shift power from one place to another at times when renewables are, not available. And that'll certainly happen. I mean, these are all variable sources. There's, depending on the part of the world, time of day, renewables aren't always predictable. So again, some sort of demand responsiveness, moving power from here to there, a smart grid. That's what we'll certainly have to pivot towards in order to complete the renewable energy transition. Again, I said we get topical. We can talk a little bit about what happened in Texas. Certainly a lot of ins and outs there, but there wasn't a huge amount of renewable penetration. Some of the renewable energy did, sort of fail when the bad weather hit. But, just as importantly, the thermal power plants sort of failed as well. And that represented a far larger chunk of the overall power. And, in addition to that, of course, there was no storage really to speak of whatsoever, no reserves, if you will. And a lot of the, the lack of sophistication of that grid meant that there wasn't any sort of responsiveness to this huge increase in demand. So again, that's a sort of topical example of how a sort of less sophisticated grid can really let us down in these sorts of emergency situations. Anyway, there's a way around it for all of us, and that's the 100% solar household, high performance home coupled with solar. And as far as expense, it's certainly possible to not only, get yourself away from the more expensive model that we're seeing vis-a-vis fossil fuels, but, if you have a very, very, tight, high performance home, then the notion of even spending less on your energy upfront is possible as well. This is something that Revision is doing all the time. I certainly hope that if anybody out there has enjoyed what they've heard, feel free to reach out and we can talk about ways that we might help you pursue the renewable energy transition as well. We've done this at this point some 10,000 or so times over the last, how long we've been, geez, I can't remember exactly, a long time. We've done this quite a lot. I'm sure at this point, most of you have friends and neighbors who might be able to tell you a little bit about their experience. In any case, there's my email address right there. And I know we're about to open it up for a question and answer, but if you have a very specific question that you thought you'd like to just ask me individually, feel free to shoot me an email. That's my address right there. Happy to take any conversation offline. Yeah, that's about it. Thanks very much for your patience, you guys. I know that went a little bit over, but I appreciate you sticking with me and looking forward to sort of doing the Q&A portion. Stop sharing my screen now. All right.
Hey. Thank you, Chris. That was wonderful. That was really, really great. I appreciate all the things you touched on there. And those of you who are watching, just a reminder, this will be recorded. So if there's anything that you want to circle back to and revisit, you will have that opportunity after we send that out. So at this time, we're going to start with a little Q&A back and forth between myself and Jessica Benner from BrightBuilt, where we're going to pose some of the questions that were put forward by readers prior to the presentation. And then once we wrap those up, we will go to the live Q&A that's been filling in the feed here and make sure we address those questions as well. So I will kick that off. First question is about our dear friends at CMP, and it says, will Central Maine Power continue to receive and distribute solar power from residential setups? So this is pertaining to the net metering question, but specific to CMP.
So, I mean, short answer is yes. Broader strokes, I can tell you that there is a effort underway being championed by Seth Berry out of Bodenham to switch to basically a co-op. Getting CMP out of the state altogether, and again switching to a co-op model. Obviously that that's long term and not not a certainty. Will Central Maine continue to be obliged to adhere to the net metering policy? Absolutely. That's one of the first things that the Mills administration did upon taking office, right, is sort of really shore up that legislation. I think that, if I wouldn't be surprised to see the adoption of time of use rates here in Maine. If you look at your electric bill, you'll notice that on the delivery page, which is basically the second page, page 2, on the opposite side of where they tell you how much they owe you, et cetera, you'll note that we only ever get charged the same rate for electricity regardless of the time of day. That's somewhat antiquated. Many states will charge you a different amount depending on the time of day. And I wouldn't be surprised to see us go in that direction here in Maine. That's a way to sort of, account for the variability of renewable energy sources. So I certainly, wouldn't be surprised to see that in the next, 10 years or so. We don't have that currently. The good news is you can offset that with a battery, right, by sort of storing power when the grid is cheaper and offsetting it when the grid is more expensive. But again, the net metering policy at this point is sort of like settled law, we could say. I don't think that's going anywhere. CMP did get in trouble recently with the way they were sort of pursuing interconnection for some larger projects. I'm sure everybody read about that. There was a number of real, significant grid scale projects who were expecting one expense to interconnect and then found out later after a review that expense would be considerably more expensive. This was all over the news. Again, luckily, the Mills administration stepped in, CMP sort of got its act together. So that won't be quite as onerous as it might have been. But again, those were for mostly grid scale projects. At this point, for homeowners, I wouldn't anticipate any fluctuation in the way that they can interconnect with the grid and share credits. I wouldn't expect that to change at all.
Go ahead, Justin.
Sure. Okay, next question. Could you compare the pluses and minuses of solar installations on rooftop versus freestanding panels?
Yeah, happily. There will be circumstances when a roof-mounted installation is not possible. So, maybe your site is overly shady, and maybe you happen to like those trees. I don't think I would blame you for that. Maybe, the orientation, you weren't able to get it just right. Who knows? We talked about the 3 different requirements. Maybe you can't optimize all of them. Maybe aesthetically speaking, you just don't like the look of panels on the roof. Maybe you'd rather see them on the ground. These are all, they're all likely. And if that's the case, you could certainly consider a ground mounted solar system. And the good thing about those is, again, you can optimize all of those requirements pretty easily, right? You can point that system, exactly true south. You can pitch the panels at exactly 35 degrees. You can ensure that the site is as shade-free as possible. Not always possible to optimize in that fashion on the roof. Keep in mind that a ground-mounted solar system will always be more expensive upfront for two reasons, really. One, you're going to have to dig, right? You're going to have to trench that power back to the house somehow or another. Digging on site carefully can be expensive. And in addition, you of course have to build a fairly robust racking system to affix these panels to the world so that they don't fly off in a storm. That can be expensive as well. So my response is ground mounted, certainly easily achievable, a little bit higher cost per watt up front. So if you have viable roof space, I would recommend at least considering that first.
Great. Okay, this is sort of a more general question, but if you were to prioritize, in what order would you prioritize passive house, pursuing a passive house model versus going for solar for net zero?
I mean, I don't know if either anyone from BrightBuilt specifically wants to tackle that. I can say that, I would say that either is going to be a perfectly good option, quite frankly. Passive house is obviously the ideal. You would know better than me how often folks are achieving that standard. And I can say that, there's going to be certainly a lot of additional expense up front there in order to achieve passive house standard. Whereas if you just had a high performance home, maybe that extra money is put towards the solar, and in either case, you can achieve the same net zero objective. Again, for our purposes. I think it's going to be the difference between, you know, a 30 panel system and a 20 panel system, for example. But, you know, that's just sort of my knee-jerk reaction. I don't know, you guys might have a keener insight as to, you know, the differences and, you know, which might be better.
Yeah, I'll add something just real quick to that, and that is that, so from the BrightBuilt standard, we largely are passive house derived in our kind of principles of how we're building our homes, but they are not quite to passive house standards as our standard spec is concerned. We can certainly pursue passive house with any one of our homes if that's desired by the client base. But what we've found to date is that we're really striving to find that point of not necessarily diminishing returns, but that sort of sweet spot between maximizing your insulation and your air sealing to where it is performing well and then will require a reduced energy load overall. Thereby, the roof area is more either sufficient or more than sufficient to support the array needed to get that home to fully net zero. So we're looking at a balance, and we are at BrightBuilt striving for net zero. So we're angling at it from that standpoint. Certainly, passive house is a phenomenal system and a great way to build a home. And we are sort of in that kind of middle ground where we're looking for that best of all worlds scenario where we're balancing out good insulation, good performance, good air balance with efficient systems to run the home. And then I'll hand it over to Jessica for the next question.
Yeah. Okay. Can you talk about the environmental impact of manufacturing and disposal of PV panels?
Yeah, that's a great one. And, you know, it's sensitive too. And, you know, my earnest hope is that, you know, progress continues to be made so that, you know, producing this equipment is not overly taxing. You know, there's obviously precious metals involved, which can be not easy to allocate. And so I hope that improves the chemistry. Same thing, you know, with battery systems. You know, I really hope that, and there's reason to suspect that this will happen, you know, that the chemistry will continue to improve so that some of those, you know, again, precious metals involved in the construction, which truly come dear, you know, maybe we pivot away from that. I can say that, you know, there hasn't been a huge reason, that's not the right way to put it. I mean, there hasn't yet been a huge effort towards the recycling of solar panels, only because there aren't that many yet that need to be recycled. This is an exceptionally rugged equipment, an aluminum frame, tempered glass on front of the cells. I mean, the equipment itself, you know, it's warranted for 25 years in most cases today. It can last a great deal longer than that. So, you know, the sort of recycling portion, if you will, I mean, it's being built up slowly but surely, but, you know, it hasn't yet had a reason to be such a robust process because, again, you know, there's not yet just a huge amount of panels every year being, you know, thrown on the trash heap. It's equipment that lasts for a very, very long time. Having said that, I can tell you that we partner pretty closely with a manufacturer, REC, and they are very proud of the fact that the carbon debt involved with producing each panel is offset within 2 years. So basically, you know, there's a carbon debt to make this equipment. You know, unfortunately, there's fossil fuel involved. It's unavoidable at this point. But again, the carbon offsets that each panel produces is enough to negate that within 2 years. So that's exciting. Again, and I certainly hope that chemistry continues to improve so that the production of this equipment is less impactful and that the recycling piece continues to develop.
Great. That's great information. Thank you, Chris. This is maybe a quick one and can be spoken to in fairly general and succinct terms, and you did address some of it in your presentation, but the question is simply, do you have any suggestions for finding land to build on that presumably are appropriate for solar?
Yeah. You know, if you have a few acres, you know, make sure they're as clear as you can. And, you know, again, the shade piece is sort of instinctual. I think most folks are sort of able to figure that out sort of on their own without having to, you know, do a lot of guesswork. And again, if you can site your building southward, that's an advantage as well. Yeah, I think that's a pretty good broad answer.
Okay, next question. Someone is concerned about having lots of big trees on their lot, having to cut them down in order to gain that solar exposure and figuring that into part of the carbon neutral equation. They're asking, are you better off leaving the trees to produce oxygen and joining a solar co-op instead? Any thoughts on that?
You know, fortunately, we live in the most forested state in the nation. There are an awful lot of trees all around. And I never specifically like telling people, hey, you have to remove this tree in order to, in order to make your solar system viable. But if that's what you have to do, I think that the carbon offsets from a solar system in totality will be more than enough to offset, the removal of a handful of trees. My recommendation is to give us a call. We'll come to the site. We can measure pretty accurately your total solar resource factor based on, again, the orientation of the building, the pitch of the roof, and the shading present. And if it looks like after that analysis, your roof doesn't have what it needs, then, maybe there's a spot on site for a ground mounted installation. We talked about that possibility. Alternatively, there's absolutely nothing wrong with the idea of a high performance home that perhaps doesn't require all that much energy, and you can still provide your energy yourself vis-a-vis a community solar farm investment. Based on the net metering policy, that investment in practice will work just the same way as solar up on the roof. Again, just all via that net metering policy. So again, my response would be that, if you're not sure, generally most of us are able to sort of be sure, sort of instinctually, but if you're not sure, give us a call, we'll come measure. And if you have to remove a tree or two, maybe not the end of the world. But if all of a sudden you would have to clear a great many, then you do have other options.
I would also add to that, to Harlan's discussion of how our houses, how BrightBuilt homes are performing. We're relying on passive house standards like passive solar heating inside the house. So not clearing trees would also diminish the passive qualities of the home's performance as well.
Okay, next question. It comes from a reader who doesn't really like the look of raised solar panels on the roof. And they're wondering whether, they're looking for an integrated solar roof such as the Tesla roofing shingles, or maybe there are embedded solar arrays that can be put between the standing seams on a standing seam roof. So sort of to put that more succinctly, what are the alternate options available in the marketplace today, specifically to Maine and Greater New England, that are not those standing panels?
So one thing I should make perfectly clear is that I don't think you're likely to find many solar contractors in this part of the world who are going to pitch panels at a separate angle from the roof. The panels will almost always be pitched in parallel, almost always. If you do otherwise, if you have a separate pitch, you're sort of creating the opportunity for wind load to turn that solar panel into a giant sail, which could have, some that could be a problem. So in general, again, 99.9% of the time you're going to see the panels pitched in parallel. Are there other options besides, the traditional solar panel that we're all used to? I would point out that there's some all black options. And those can really look very slick indeed. You can have a nice big square of all black panels that from afar looks like a sheet of obsidian. The aesthetics can be exceptionally sleek. All things considered, there really isn't another option today. We've all heard about the Tesla solar shingles. I would say that product is 10 years away from even being viable in other parts of the world besides Maine, where we have pretty significant winters and so on and so forth. So that to me will be really exciting when it happens. The idea of, again, killing two birds with one stone. You've got your roof shingle that's also producing power. Amazing. And when it happens, I'll be the first one in line. But it's just not there yet. There have been a handful of these projects built. None of them have really worked. And again, that's been in the Southwest. That it's years away from being a viable option in Maine. So for now, the idea of the solar panel, that, as we all understand it, is probably going to continue to be the default for some time. And again, there's other aesthetic options, at least as much as, you could consider an all black panel, which might be a tiny bit more expensive, but, an enhanced aesthetic there. And if you just don't like the look of it on the roof whatsoever, which is perfectly fine, then again, you've also got the ground mounted option, or perhaps offsite solar is a possibility as well.
Sort of piggybacking off of that, what is the next big version of new solar tech to hit the market, if you know?
Yeah, I mean, again, the shingle thing, it's under development still, not there yet. There's every year we'll see, the wattage tick up a little bit. Obviously the cost per watt is something, really it has to be kept in mind. You want to see a cost per watt of $3 or less. So every year, all of a sudden, our standard offer will be 320 watts per panel, 340, 350. This is always creeping up, while again, the cost per watt manages to stay about the same. That's certainly true. We'll see improvements to the inverter every now and again, new technology there. The inverter is the device I talked about a little earlier, which its primary function is to convert the DC current that the panels produce to AC, which is of course what our homes all run on. So we'll see some improvements there every now and again, but in general, there's not really radical changes, at least not since as long as I've been in this business, and I don't really see any earth-shattering ones on the horizon. Again, I think that the shingles is the real exciting thing, but it's just not there yet. Maybe another 10 years or so.
Okay, at this time, for those of you who have been waiting patiently with your questions over in the sidebar, I think we're going to switch our attention to those questions. If you had submitted a question that was not addressed either in the presentation or in the follow-up, I would say you can follow up either directly with me at BrightBuilt or perhaps with Chris as well, if you feel that he's the right person to answer the question. We want to make sure your questions get answered, but we're going to switch now to the Q&A on the sidebar. And we're going to try to go through these as quickly as possible in the interest of time. So first question is, any inside info on the political progress on increased incentives for solar installations? I'm curious if this was state of Maine myself too, if there's any indication that there's going to be anything coming down the pipe on increased incentives for putting in solar.
Long ago, there was a state rebate. It has not been in place for a number of years. I don't foresee there being any changes to that in the near future. Again, we're fortunate to have a very robust net metering policy. Not the case even, in New Hampshire or Massachusetts necessarily, our neighbors. We are fortunate to have that one-to-one here, but no state level incentive beside that, and we certainly haven't heard any rumors of that changing in the near term.
I'm going to piggyback on this one just before we switch over to Jess real quick. This one's kind of related to that in relation to net metering, and you can also maybe answer the question about state incentives with this question, but is the one-to-one net metering value also in place in New Hampshire, Massachusetts, and I'll add Vermont to that as well?
I mean, I'm not, an expert by any means in those states. I can tell you that New Hampshire, it does it differently depending on what part of the state it is. They have 2 different utilities, and each of those utilities does it differently. Revision doesn't do we're not actually in Vermont yet, so in fairness, I have to plead ignorance there to say I'm not entirely sure. It is fairly robust in Massachusetts, a little bit different, but they do have a strong net metering policy there as well.
So I believe you sort of answered this one a little bit in your presentation before or after this question came in, but I'll still ask it. Is there a scenario where you would have solar plus a propane fuel generator for when the grid is down? Would you ever recommend that?
Yeah, that could, solar and an existing generator can certainly interact just fine. Every solar system is equipped with what's known as rapid shutdown, which is basically exactly what it sounds like. The inverter, which I mentioned a moment ago, it can sense what's happening with the grid. If the grid goes down, the inverter turns off the solar system automatically, instantaneously. If you have a generator with an automatic transfer switch, it will automatically turn on at that instant the same way it always would. Those 2 systems can interact just fine. I will also say that it's possible to incorporate battery and propane generator and solar. All that can work together just fine as well. You may pursue new systems from Generac. Generac, they've been in the generator space for some time. They recently purchased Pika Energy. I'm not sure if anybody on this webinar is familiar with Pika. They were a local company building inverters and battery systems stuff in Westbrook. In any case, purchased by Generac. So now Generac is offering a sort of all-in-one, propane backup, battery backup that can easily, tie into solar. So there's definitely some options there that are cool. If you went the Tesla route, your interaction between the generator and the battery might be a little more involved. But in any case, all these systems can work just fine with the solar system. And, for that matter, so could perhaps, as I said earlier, like a wheel around generator, like the 5 kilowatt or so type that you plug into an inlet on the side of your home, that can work with solar just fine. Again, the systems are equipped with rapid shutdown, so there won't be any interference.
I think this question relates also, and you've somewhat addressed this, but just really quickly, if you're grid tied, will the system work in the event of an outage?
If you are grid tied, your system will automatically turn off when the grid goes down, unless you have a battery.
Great.
And I'll just add that that's a safety feature, mostly to keep first responders and so forth safe. I mean, if you're back feeding to the grid normally, right? We talked about net metering, surplus, grid, credit, et cetera. If the grid's down and there's some fellow working on the lines, a few blocks away, and you're back feeding to the grid, I mean, obviously that could be a problem. So again, only with a battery can you continue to have the solar panels running when the grid is down.
Okay, so I think we have two similar questions in here. One is asking what the brand of the water heater is. Another asks what brand of German water heater is the one you use in your projects.
Yeah, I mean, I can tell you a little bit about what Revision does. I'm not sure if you have any specific feedback as well. So we install primarily Stiebel Eltron heat pump water heaters. That's equipment that our plumbing team is just crazy about. Excellent equipment, very well insulated, excellent performance, 10-year warranty. It will have paid for itself well before that warranty expires. Again, I mentioned the rebate that's available. There's other options as well. We've strictly adhered to Stiebel Eltron as much as possible over the last 10 years or so. But there might be other opportunities to incorporate other options. It's a heat pump water heater, so there may be times when let's say you've got relatives coming over, and someone's going to be in the shower, and then another person's taking a shower, and then the dishwasher's going to be going, and maybe you're aware of the fact that your hot water needs will be particularly high coming up. The Stiebel Eltron we install, it does have an electric element backup, so that you can really reduce your recovery time for those instances when you're aware that your hot water usage will be particularly high. But it doesn't just rely on the heat pump function. Again, it does have an electric element backup as well. And there's other options, but again, that's the one that we've been installed the most of over the last decade or so.
Okay, thank you, Chris. We are at just a minute after 1. I think we're going to wrap up now in order to close things out. And we do have about 11 questions outstanding in the Q&A box. And so, Chris, would it work for you if we bundle all the questions and send them to you via email? And then I will include your answers to those questions in the link when we send that out to everybody who RSVP'd to this. Would that be okay?
Sounds great.
Okay, so for those of you who have outstanding questions, want to capture those, bundle those with the remaining questions that we didn't get to from the RSVP form, and then those answers will come to you in writing in our follow-up email. So thank you so much, Chris. Excellent presentation. We really appreciate you joining us for this and helping our BrightBuilt readership become more familiar with considerations around solar. It's been really, really great.
Yeah, the pleasure's mine. Thank you to the BrightBuilt team for inviting us to take part today. This has been great.
Okay. And thanks everyone for attending. So see you all soon.
Thank you.